where is this graph discontinuous? So we could either look where it's continuous or where it's discontinuous. Let's talk about the graph. Now here's the two equations I put in my calculator, just like here. And when I graph it, what you'd see is here's the cosine x minus 1, and here's 5x. This equation is saying x is less than 0, so from the left side up to 0, we're using the cosine graph. But then when you get from 0 on, you're going to use the 5x graph. So the graph kind of looks like cosine. It's a cosine graph. It's going to hit, and then it's going to go up at 5x. So that's the 2 points. Now, these two graphs, each of these graphs individually, both this graph and this graph are both continuous. They hit. So this graph, where is it discontinuous? Nowhere. It is discontinuous nowhere. So there are no discontinuities. So this graph is always continuous, which makes it easy. So if we look at the graph, you see, boom, it hits right there and keeps going. Now, if these two graphs did not hit at 0, it would be discontinuous. But since they do connect at 0, it is continuous, the whole graph. All right, 86 here. I want to do this 86, problem 86. Now, the IVT stands for intermediate value theorem. I want to find where, if an intermediate value theorem does apply, what C values does it apply? So what this is saying here, I have a graph on the interval 5/2 to 4, which this is 2.5. So from 2.5 to 4, and it's saying that somewhere between 2.5 and 4, x values wise, there is a output of 6, is what they're assuming. And if that is true, where would it equal 6? So the first step we need to do is this graph continuous? Yes, this graph is continuous. All but x equals 1. It's continuous everywhere but when x equals 1, because here x equals 1 would be a error. But is 1 in the interval? No. So we don't have to worry about x equals 1 because it's not in the interval. So cool, it's not in the interval. So let's now focus in on, it's not in the interval, let's focus in on finding the two values to help us with intermediate value theorem, because it is continuous for the interval. Okay, so we want to find f of 5/2, and we want to find f of 4. Now when you plug 5/2 into this equation, you get 5/2 squared, and you got 5/2 minus 1 plus 5/2. And when you take the time to do all that math, you end up with 5 and 5/6. And when you do this one, you end up with 4 squared plus 4/4 minus 1. And for this one, you're going to end up with 6 and 2/3. What does all that mean? Well, if I was to graph this, okay, I'm going to make a graph here. And you go 1, 2, 3, 4. At 2.5, I would be at 2.5 here. At 2.5, I'd be 5 up. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the graph going up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 and 5, 6. So almost at 6. But at 2.5, I'd be right there. And at 4, I'd be 6 and 2/3, so I'd just be right there. Now the next thing is f of c equals 6, meaning this line right here, that's f of c equals 6. And my question for intermediate values theorem states that to get from this dot to that dot, I must cross that red line at least once. Since the graph is continuous between in this interval, that interval right there, it is continuous. I must cross that red line at least once. So the intermediate value theorem, the IVT applies because it's continuous on the interval, because x minus 1 is not in the interval, and that 6 is between these two answers. Since 6 is between these two answers, we're good to go. So, what do we do? Well, we want to find out where does this graph that goes between these two dots hit that red line. So all you do is you go x squared plus x over x minus 1. You set it equal to 6, and make that 6 over 1. And we're going to solve this. So to solve this, you're going to do something called cross multiplying. So that's going to be x squared plus x equals 6 times x is 6x. 6 times negative 1 is negative 6. And we're going to solve this, so minus this all over. We're going to get x squared, this will be minus 5x plus 6 equals 0. And then we're going to factor. Looks like it's going to be x minus 3, x minus 2. So my answers are x equals 3 and 2. Now, what that means is, both at 3 and 2, it's going to hit 6. So at 2 and at 3, those are my 2 points that can hit 6. You have a graph that looks something like this. Okay, so at both those points, it hits the red line 6. The question is, which of those two actually, here's the tricky part, which of those two is in the interval? Only this one. So my answer is C equals 3. When C equals 3 is when you have a height of 6. The 2 is not in the interval. 2 is right to the left of the interval. So that's very important to watch out for that.